Overall, I liked the result for the most part, but I still leave the book with a sense of relative disappointment. And I think in order to fully explain why that is, I'll have to make an entire separate video because I have a bone to pick with modern publishing and I've had just about enough at this point. So expect to see me foaming at the mouth sometime in March. In 1787, Russia is on the brink of another war with the Ottoman Empire, and in order to impress her allies, Empress Ekaterina II decides to take them on a 6-month riverboat trip through what is then known as New Russia. The problem is, there is nothing really impressive in the region at the time. It's mostly empty of people and therefore of cities. And the problem is solved by the rather crafty general governor of the region, Grigory Potyomkin. Quick side note here, in the Russian language, if you have an O in a word but the stress is not on it, it is meant to be read as an A. And if you have the E with the 2 dots above it, that is a yo sound, and the stress is always on it. That is in case you're wondering why I'm pronouncing it Potyomkin. Sidebar over, let's continue. So, Grigory Potyomkin, he took it upon himself to build a number of fake pasteboard villages along the river. So they would build the city, him and his people would dress as happy, well-fed villagers, they would smile and wave while the barge was passing through town, and as soon as the barge was gone, they would disassemble the set and move it downriver overnight. This has come to be known as a Potyomkin village, and the term is used to describe a fake facade that is meant to cover an unfavorable reality, and its point is to impress, but more so to deceive. And I'm starting the video with this rather obscure tidbit because I believe we have been subjected to a whole bunch of literary fake villages by the publishing industry, and it's pissing me off. And I'm going to use Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson, one of the biggest releases of 2024 and my most anticipated book for the past 10 years, to illustrate my point. Let's go. Now, before we begin, I don't usually write scripts for my videos. I sometimes have an outline to make sure that I don't forget a specific point, but I mostly just wing it. However, in this case, I am rather upset, kind of irrationally so, you'll see. So in order to make sure that I don't ramble incoherently for 3 hours without getting to the point, I wrote my thoughts down and I'm gonna read from them mostly. I'll probably inject on-the-spot commentary here and there, but I don't want to pretend like I'm not reading from it, mostly because I don't know how to do that. So if you see me reading, that's the reason. I hope it doesn't bother you, and in case it does, please accept my most insincere apologies. So, Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson. I'm gonna put it back there because I can't possibly hold this thing for the entirety of the video. This is an adult, remember that part, epic fantasy, and the ending of a major arc in one of my favorite series, the Stormlight Archive. The first 3 books in the series are exquisite, and that is mostly my subjective opinion, but of course it is. I suppose you're here to hear that. They are well written and fun and grand, and more than anything, felt real. Not because of the setting, obviously, but because the characters in them felt like they could be real people. They spoke like real people. They felt the things that real people feel. And because you could see that the author had actually taken the time to develop each element in each character. And even when I didn't understand everything, I trusted the author would eventually reward my patience, and patience was required because he would set certain things in book 1 that would be paid off 4 books later. But I felt safe and satisfied because I could feel that the author steadily breathes life into this story. And then Rhythm of War came, and I felt slightly disappointed, and at the time I couldn't put my finger on why exactly I was feeling this way, but I felt it. And then Wind and Truth came, and by this point, as you can imagine, I am very invested in the series and I am very biased in favor of it. I was awaiting this book like I would await the return of a loved one, only to be met by what felt like an AI clone of said loved one. The book felt like it was hastily put together, trying to hit goalposts and fill checklists, like it was assembled based on a model rather than organically developed, which has been my feeling about a lot of the recently published, highly publicized books, to be honest. And I know that this sounds like a load of ambiguous nonsense, so let me get very specific. There is a scene in Wind and Truth where Kaladin and his friend are meeting a book quartermaster lady and are having a very strange interaction. I'll summarize it here, and it's technically a spoiler, but only for certain world elements and only if you haven't gotten to Oathbringer yet. It doesn't really contain anything of substance, which is actually going to be my point here, but spoiler alert anyway. So Kaladin and Syl are meeting this lady to whom Syl has ordered a book and a few writing supplies. They go to pick them up, there's some back and forth, some ridiculous and consequential joking around, but most baffling of all, the lady is rude to Sil and Sil alone. Mind you, she is pointedly described as deferential to everybody else, but to her she is being dismissive and bigoted and altogether insufferable. Sil feels terrible, naturally, so Kaladin makes a scene and a grandstand where he scolds the lady, tells her how miserable she must be and how bad it is to be a bully and to go get help. The lady feels ashamed and Sil and Kaladin leave. The end. Now, on the face of it, this is good, right? It carries an important message about bullying the ones that are different from us and whatnot. Except, this is not a standalone story. This is supposed to work as a part of this book and this series in general, and in the context of this book and this series, this scene makes absolutely no sense. Because Sil is an honor sprint, and not just any honor sprint, she's Kaladin's honor sprint. They're basically celebrities in Urithiru, being that they have saved Alethi countless times, and this very tower just recently. We have seen people show deference to her time and again. She is supposed to be revered by everyone, and she has been, and even feared every time she has shown herself until this very moment. Not to mention, Urithiru is now alive, which brings additional level of legitimacy to Spren. There's absolutely no legitimate reason being given for this nobody lady to be treating Sil like less than, especially considering that Sil is many stations above her. It flies in the face of a lot of what we've learned about this world. This scene took 6 pages and somehow merited its own chapter in this already gigantic book, only to deliver a generic message in the most obvious and basic, not to mention inappropriate way, as though the author was talking to 14-year-olds. This is an adult, remember that part, epic fantasy? And to make matters worse, after this scene is done, this is never brought up again, ever. It came out of nowhere and it went nowhere. Now, there's no one way to write a good book. There's plenty of ways to structure your novel in order to make it interesting, and maybe one day I'll talk about the authors who write books based on a formula, which is also a thing that has been irking me. But there is one key element that is shared by every good story, be it a book or a movie, and that is the law of cause and effect between the scenes. And to illustrate my point, a bad story goes something like this happens, and then that happens, and then that happens, while a good story goes this happens, therefore that happens, or this happens, but then that happens. Do you see the difference? So when we have a case where a scene has no influence on anything else, or like in this case, even worse, not only does it not influence anything that came after it, but actively goes against what we have established before, we have objectively bad storytelling. This is basic stuff. And an author of Sanderson Station knows this, yet he chose to leave this in. Not just him, his editors and publishers too, and I'm willing to speculate that maybe they insisted it be there. Multiple people read this book before it hit the public, and this scene still made its way to publication. And that's not all, because regularly through the book, we'd have a scene that goes something like, this important thing is about to happen, but here comes Bob the messenger. Bob likes men, but for many years he was too afraid to tell people because he was worried that they will ostracize him. And then one day Bob told his father about this, and his father was like, doesn't matter to me, Bob, as long as you're happy. And now Bob is married to this other guy who was also hated by people because of his preference, but now they're happy and they live with their 2 children in this city. And Bob joined the army to defend him, but because Bob is not very good with the spear and he runs fast, he is now the messenger. And then Bob would say something like, the soldiers are coming, and then promptly f*** off forever, never to be seen again. So can somebody please explain to me, why did I need to be subjected to this drive-by exposition dump about Bob? And please, don't get me wrong, it's not that I hate Bob or his story, it's just that his story has nothing to do with anything that's going on here. I wouldn't mind reading a book about Bob next time, but he doesn't need to be randomly sprinkled in this scene. Because beyond breaking the flow of the story, what purpose does it serve? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I'll tell you a bit later. Mind you, there's no actual Bob in the book, it's just an exaggerated and hyperbolized example. Alright? This is one of the biggest problems with this book, making it feel both overwritten and underwritten at the same time. We have a 1300 plus pages book where some of the main plot lines are underdeveloped, while we spare page time to dump irrelevant exposition and generic moralization about random subjects, which might be important in their own right, but serve this particular book not at all. And the thing is, you can't cover every topic that everyone has ever cared about in a single book. You certainly can't invest the needed time, effort, and respect to develop develop each topic properly. You have to pick and choose. You can't create something that everyone will like, and attempting to do so will, ironically, ensure that you create a thing that nobody loves. And I think that's what Sanderson tried to do here, to write the biggest, most epic, most socially conscious fantasy book ever that will make absolutely everyone feel noticed and special. But the thing is, you can't do that with a single book, because the human mind can only focus on so many things simultaneously. To try and write a book that's gonna prioritize every single important topic on this planet is to ask the reader to focus on everything at the same time, and that's gonna leave them feel spread too thin, like too little butter on too big a piece of bread. And if you get that reference, we can be very good friends. I mean, we can be friends even if you don't get it. But still. Call me naive, but I ultimately think that Sanderson had very good intentions with this book. I don't know him personally, obviously, but he has shown himself to be a kind and empathetic human being, and when you work so closely on something, you tend to get too attached and lose the bigger picture. I mean, I only read those books and I'm already too attached, so I suppose I kind of get it. But that's why you have people to look at this book before you publish it that aren't too attached to it. So then my question is, why did his editor and publisher, who are not emotionally attached to this story and are supposedly very well experienced professionals, allow this to happen? Why is that a nobody such as yours truly could spot these basic writing mistakes and the supposed titans of publishing didn't? Well, the thing is, I think they did, but I think to them this is a feature and not a bug. The way I see it, this is all done intentionally, and unfortunately, the fault for that lies with us, the readers. In his essay, The Death of the Author, Roland Barthes argues that when evaluating a story, we must entirely separate the author, their intentions, and their beliefs from the work they wrote. And in principle, I think he had a point, but to me, the one mistake he made was that he couldn't see into the future. With the rise of the internet and social media and the perpetual state of undress under which we exist online, it is no longer possible to separate the work from its creator or its publisher. We know all there is to know, and we simply can't forget who wrote these words and who will make the money off of them, because their image is often on the forefront of marketing. So for authors and publishers alike, it's more important than ever to appear virtuous and appealing to the general audience, and like everything else, the publishing industry looks for the path of least resistance. And as M.L. Wang says in Blood Over Bright Haven, it's much easier to tell yourself you're a good person than it is to actually be one. A great book, by the way, highly recommend. So, what is the easiest way to proclaim yourself to be virtuous and good? Well, you go on the internet and do market research for what readers care about most, what topics excite them, and what will get you to look most palatable to the current audience. And here come we, loudly proclaiming what we value most, the topics that are dearest to our hearts, and our specific stance on every subject. Then they gather the info, turn it into keywords, and start mass-producing books with as many of those keywords as they can cram into a synopsis, dangling the important message as bait in front of us. Then we read those synopsises, get mightily bamboozled, and we all live mediocrely ever after. The end. So what am I saying here? What are we supposed to do? Should we stop talking about the topics that are important to us? Should we stop asking to buy books on those topics? Well, no, of course not. This is not the part that makes us guilty. It's that we have become so sensitive and protective of the subjects that are near and dear to us that we stop caring about anything else once we see them represented. It's the things that we stopped asking for. That's the problem. You know what pisses me off the most in this particular context? I mean, it's the gaslighting. I understand that it's tough to make it as an author and that sometimes people are forced to resort to marketing tricks in order to make it. We all do it. It's not the end of the world. I don't mind being encouraged or nudged into buying something. I don't mind being swayed by marketing. I don't even mind having my interest being used as a vehicle to drive sales, as long as what awaits me on the other end is worth my time and money, as long as it's not just bait with no substance to offer. If you're familiar with my reading diary spreadsheet, you know that I rate my books based based on a formula. We have 5 criteria: world building, character development, plot development, writing style, and enjoyment, and my rating is an average of those 5. And if a criteria is not applicable to a book, I simply exclude it, or if I'm reading a nonfiction, I take world building to mean adherence to facts. But if you know anything about humanity, you know that enjoyment is actually influenced by all other criteria plus the topics and themes that are featured in the book. It is a subjective feeling more than anything else, but I find it to be necessary because we are none of us machines. And I've been asked several times why I don't include diversity, for example, or certain types of representation as part of my rating criteria. And mind you, we're talking about rating criteria here, we're not talking about criteria for picking what to read. And my answer here is very simple. I don't include diversity and representation as part of my rating criteria because to me, those are themes and topics. They are not qualities of a book. You can write a good book on any topic, and just because a certain theme is not included into that book doesn't make it a bad book. It might mean that you won't be interested in reading it, but that's personal preference, and this is where I draw the distinction. Whenever I'm selecting what I'm going to read, I usually would read the synopsis and then promptly forget about it, but at the time I will see what it is about, and if I'm interested in the themes and topics, then I will go online and check the rating to see if it's a good book on these themes and topics. Do you see the distinction here? And I'm going to give you another stupid simple example. If you're writing a historical fiction about a Bulgarian village from the 1100s, you probably won't see much diversity. Now, does that mean that this book deserves a lower rating and that it's a bad book? Not necessarily. It might be a bad book, but it won't be because of the lack of diversity. Again, it might just mean that you won't be interested in reading it. That's it. And here's another way to look at it. Having good character development is paramount to having people be interested in your book, and it's difficult to do. Good writing style requires both skill and talent. Developing your plot in an interesting and coherent way is an art in and of itself, which often takes meticulous planning and, again, a lot of skill and effort. Choosing to include a topic, choosing to feature a theme, that's easy. It requires no talent and no effort. Now, including those themes and topics in an elegant way and weaving them nicely into your story, that's what's going to require effort and talent, but that's also ultimately going to be a result of writing style and character development and, whenever applicable, world building. The simple choice to include a specific element in your book, especially nowadays, powered by the internet and all the trending keywords there that tell you what's in your best interest, that's very easy. And here's the cherry on top. Whenever you have a complaint about any of this, it's immediately turned from bait into a shield and a bludgeon. Because if I say that I disliked a book on a sensitive topic, it's immediately turned as though I have an issue with the topic itself, while what I actually have an issue with is the quality of the book. I want to read books on important topics, but I want to read good books. We have been force-fed performative garbage for years now, and we have accepted it willingly because it's usually for a good cause. Diversity, representation, equality, kindness, in theory, all great things. But more and more often, they come in the form of half-assed, pro forma, lazy, phony, performative drivel. More and more, I see it in newly published and highly advertised books. Books that regularly appear on this and that must-read lists. Books that are hailed as revolutionary for regurgitating the same generic message in the same skin-deep way over and over again. Because nobody wants to be the jerk who criticized a book that features a sensitive topic, because maybe that sensitive topic had no place in the book because the author wanted to write something else, but he awkwardly shoved it in anyway because maybe he wanted a shortcut to notoriety and praise. Maybe their publisher wanted to appear more socially conscious. Or maybe, like Sanderson, they wanted to write the most bookiest book of all books that features all the issues that we have ever cared about, and as a result, he couldn't spare enough pages, time, and effort to develop any of them properly. Maybe they wanted to get their book on the lists of most impactful and important whatever that seemingly are always compiled by people who never read more than the synopsis of a book. People that don't care one lick for good books or good causes for that matter. People who only care if the resume has the desired keywords that will make them look good. Whatever the reason, more often than not recently, instead of a meaningful and impactful story, we get a badly written and unoriginal product. And now I'm the asshole for noticing. This actually reminded me about a scene from Arrested Development. I don't know if you remember blah blah blah. Why should you go to jail for a crime someone else noticed? Terrible actress. Good writing, coherent development, deeper consideration, contemplation beyond the immediately obvious, any sort of an original thought, respect and trust in the capacity of the reader to think and understand. Honesty and authenticity, those are things that are sorely needed. And you might say that those things are ethereal and can be properly measured, and you are right, but there is more to humanity and to art than what is quantifiable. Now, I am no fool, as prideful and ironically as foolish as that sounds. And you might not know that about me, but by day I am a data analyst. A big part of my job is to spot trends and to see the bigger picture. And I am noticing a trend here. I open a book and it's the right words in the right order, but it's always the same words and in the same order and nothing else. And as an author, if all you can produce is adherence to the expectations of the populace, then I'm sorry, but your story is not worth telling. And if you don't think so, if you think that the subject matter is all that matters, then why don't we just have authors drop whatever it is they want to say as a bullet point list instead of asking me to waste 40 to 60 hours of my life on your half-baked imitation of a story. When we elevate the topics and themes of a book as an end-all be-all, when we're willing to ignore bad writing for the sake of certain subjects, when we refuse to be critical of a book because it features an important message, no matter how mediocre the delivery, we're telling the publishing industry that they don't need to care about anything else, that we take any kind of slop as long as it's packaged the proper way, that we take a fake village as long as the facade looks right. We're giving them a shortcut and a cheat code for mass-producing fake, cheap and shallow commercial successes, the literary equivalent of a plastic fruit. Looks nice on your table, but has no nutritional value and can't feed you. And if all you care about is appearance, then I suppose that's good enough. But if you're truly hungry and somebody offers you a plastic fruit, you'd be pissed off like I am right now. I don't know if you can tell. And I know what some of you will say, but isn't it better to get something, to get these topics represented at all? And to that I say, no. It's not better, because if you pump out 100 badly written books on a given subject, then people will start thinking that the subject is not worth reading about. And secondly, why is that even the choice? Why do we allow ourselves to consider that we don't deserve good books or that we can't get good books on important topics? I don't believe in quantity over quality. 10 bad books don't equal one good one, ever. If we want to get good stories, we need to stop fake clapping for fake effort, because what you permit, you promote. Is Sanderson the biggest problem here? Absolutely not. But he is becoming a part of the problem, because he doesn't need to do any of these tricks. He is tremendously popular and rich, probably one of the most popular and well-paid currently living writing authors, the guy with the 2 biggest Kickstarters ever, which is why him publishing this book in this state got me so pissed off that I'm actually making a rant video, something I've only done one other time for the 3 years I've been on booktube, and that one other time I was ironically actually defending him. And this video I'm making here doesn't mean that I hate him now. I've read 32 of his works and most of them have been fantastic. Some of them have kept me sane through some of my most difficult moments, and I can't wave that away. I can't forget that, and I don't want to. But this seeming sellout is where I draw the line, because it's the most annoying symptom of a failing, lazy, idiocracy-inspired society when we get no art and no literature, just content with no soul through no effort, simply by pressing a societal button for quick, cheap praise. Here's a generic important message that you've already heard 300,000 times in these exact same words, and we all agree on it. Now call me brave. And for the love of goodness, please listen to the words that are coming out of my mouth. I am not debating the merit of the message, but I will not be baited into calling a badly written book good just because the author stapled it on top of it. I am sick and tired of fake villages. Build real ones or build nothing at all.